Kisovo al oretz asher Hashem Elokecha nosei loch v'yirishto v'yoshavta bo. When you come to the land which Hashem is giving you, you will inherit it and you will settle in it. V'marto osimo lai melech gechol agim shusoi. I will appoint a king like all the nations which surround me, surround us. Som tosim alech melech. Asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha. You should appoint a king which God will choose. Mikerev achecha tosim alech melech. He has to be of a certain pedigree. He has to meet this the pedigree is crucial. Besides, Malchus, we know, was given to Yehuda due to the brachos of Yaakovinu. He had said Yehuda has to have the Malchus, the kingship. The royalty of Klal Yisrael is the tribe of Yehuda. Although when the nation split, there was Malchus Yisrael, Malchus Yehuda, but the primary kingship is Yehuda. That's the leadership. That's the reason why the Nisim, the Gemara tells us, the princes of Israel, they were from Shevet Yehuda, and the Zelarchs in Bavel were also from Yehuda. It was either the paternal line or the maternal line in terms of Etzo versus Bavel. We find the famous Ramban in Parshas Vayechi, where Yaakov identifies the destiny and the function of every Shevet due to his brachos. He points out something interesting. We find that Chanukah, the miracle of Chanukah, came through the Chashmonoim, which were Kohanim. And yet, the Gemara tells in Bava Basra that anyone who says that he's from the family of the Chashmonoim, Eino El Eved, he's a Canaanite slave. Because Herod, who was a slave in the house of the Chashmonoim, Hurdis, he wanted to marry the last, he killed the family. Herod was the Canaanite slave of the house of Chashmonoim, and he wiped out the family, and he left over just one woman who he wanted to marry. And she committed suicide. She would not marry him. She jumped off a roof, committed suicide. So therefore, the Gemara says, Kol Omeshu Mishpachas Chashmonoi En El Eved. He's from the family of Hurdis. Herod, he was a Canaanite slave. So he asks, if not for the Chashmonoim's zealotry and sacrifice, there would not be a Klal Yisrael. Due to their Mesiras Nefesh, their self-sacrifice, we merited the miracle of Chanukah. Rab Miatim, Gibor Miat Chaloshim, whatever we say in the Alanisim. So why, due to what they provided and what they brought about, why did they merit a Shmirah that at least the family should have survived? Why were they subject to this annihilation, that there shouldn't be a trace of the family? So the Ramban says that because the Chashmonoim were Kohanim, and they became the kings of Israel, of Klal Yisrael, which was a violation to the bracha and the dictate of Yaakovinu. Therefore, they did not merit to survive, and that's why they were all annihilated. So you could have a schus that because of you, Klal Yisrael continues as a spiritual people, what they had done. Nevertheless, we merited the Nes of Chanukah, the light burnt for the additional 7 days with the Pach Shemen, which indicated that the Shechina is now amidst. Doesn't make a difference. You violate the word of Yaakovinu, his brocham, because the spiritual infrastructure is Yehuda has to be Malchus, has to be the kings. You can't topple the apple cart. It's a disruption of the function of Klal Yisrael. So therefore, Som Tosem Alecha Melech is only from Shevet Yehuda. Okay? So over here, there's a Balaturim. He says something interesting. Som Tosem Alecha Melech. Som Tosem Alecha. He says, B'gematri Shloshim Malus. The numerical value of Somtos Melecho means you have to have 30 levels of distinction. Lomar, Shamalchus Niknis Bishloshim Malos. That to be worthy for Malchus, you have to have 30 levels of distinction. Like it says, Memches Dvorm Shator Nikmas Behem. It's the same Mishnah over there. Each one has to have its levels. To be worthy of acquiring Torah, you have to have Memches Dvorim. For Malchus, you have to have Shloshim Malos. So Shom Tosim Alecha is 30 Malos. Mikerev Achecho, from the midst of your brothers, the Baal Turma says, Begematria Mishevet Yehuda. What is the Kerev Achecho? From the tribe of Yehuda, tribe of Judah. He is the only one who qualifies to be the king. So that so the mitzvah of Som Tosim Alecha Mikerev Achecho, Hashem is saying, this is the mitzvah. This Torsh Mechsav, this is the mitzvah, is Mikerev Achecho Mishevet Yehuda. So not having Shevet, that's a violation of what? Of not only the dictate of Yaakov, but what Yaakov said, because he understood in terms of the spiritual make of Klal Yisrael, like we have Yisachar and Zvulun. Zvulun was the only Shevet that was qualified to be dedicated to Torah, to support Torah. Therefore, Zvulun was chosen to be the partner of Yisachar for that reason. Identically, Yaakov understood the spiritual makeup of Yehuda regarding the infrastructure of Klal Yisrael, even though each Shevet has its own distinct character, but nevertheless, it's one Klal Yisrael. It's made of 12 tribes. With Levi, it's 13. Each one complements the other to create the totality of Klal Yisrael. Yehuda is the leadership. That's the Malchus. That's Melech. Kerev Achecho, what's the Kerev Achecho? B'gmatria b'shevet Yehuda. Okay. Now, we find over here, just to skip a little bit, I'll get back to the other things. On Yud Ches, v'hoyu b'shivta al kisim amlachto. Every Jew has an obligation to write a Sefer Torah. It's the last mitzvah aseh, the last positive commandment in Torah. Kisul lachemes hashir azos. It's the 613th mitzvah in the Torah. Every male Jew has an obligation to write a Sefer Torah or to delegate it through a shliach, or even purchasing. The Gemara says, even if you purchase a Sefer Torah that already was written, it's the equivalent of writing a Sefer Torah. But you have to purchase it. What happens if a person inherits a Sefer Torah? He does not fulfill the mitzvah. He has to do an active act of purchasing or acquiring. It can be gifted to a person. A gift is only because due to the acquisition of the person agreeable to acquire. But if through inheritance, it's not good enough. But the king, in addition to the obligation of, as every member of Klal Yisrael has to have a Sefer Torah, he has to have an additional Sefer Torah. A king has to have two Sefer Torah. V'hoyo b'shivta al kisim malachto, when he sits on his kingly throne, the Kosovo es Mishnah Torah Zos al Sefer Mufnei Akohanim Halavim. Now, v'hoyseimo v'korbo kol yimei chayav, and the Sefer Torah must be with him continuously, all the days of his life. L'man yilmad liyiro es Hashem Elokov. A king is a position of power that we say, power corrupts. It's due to his ego becomes so inflated, he loses his sense of objectivity. He loses his humility. So why does he have to say Torah continuously with him? That he should study it. And what is he? L'man yilmad liyiro es Hashem Elokov. When he reads that Torah, he will learn how to fear God. Lishmor is called divrei Torah zos. Meaning, if you have Yiras Shamayim, if he has proper fear of God, he will observe Kol Divrei Torah, the Torah's entirety, Bezachukim Ho'elu Lasosam, to do them. Okay? So that's why he has to have it continuously with him. So if you take a look at the Balaturim, Levilti Rum Levavo Be'echov. Next post, Levilti Rum Levavo Be'echov. And why is it so important for him to study it, to fear God? Because only through that, Levilti Rum Levavo Me'echov, it will prevent him from being haughty and lording over his brothers. Ulevilti surmin ha'mitzvah yom small, because the moment he's rum levav u'me'achov, ultimately it leads, that will cause him to remove himself from the mitzvah yamin small. Even he does the mitzvah, but he doesn't do it properly. He compromises. That's yamin small, to the right or to the left. L'man yarich yomim al mamlachto. So he should have long days in his kingship. Hu v'anav b'kerev Yisrael. He and his children in the midst of Yisrael. So now over here, the pasuk. Why does he have to have this Torah to study continuously? To yira levilti ram levavo mi'echov. So this pasuk, if you notice, the Palturim points out, ha pasuk maschil u'mesayim balamid. The pasuk says levilti the lamid, and it concludes with Yisrael, b'kerev Yisrael. So again, he points out, HaPosuk Maschil Mesayim Belamid, Remez, Sheyetze Malchus Mi Yehuda, this is beautiful, that the Malchus will emanate from the Shevet Yehuda, Sheshmo Ola Lamed. The gematria, the numerical value of Yehuda is 30. We said to become a king, he has to have 30 levels of distinction. V'lamed Milos B'Malchus, yeah, the 30 levels of distinction to be appropriate king. David ben Lamed Shana b'Molcho. David HaMelech, who was David Melech Shalchai v'Kayom, he was 30 years old when he became a king. He was 30. So we see continues this reiteration, emphasis of 30. Ukach Omer Shira Shemascheles b'Lamed. And therefore he said the Shira, which begins with Lamed, V'Lamtzech le'Eved Hashem leDavid. It's interesting. He was the Eved Hashem. David is called Eved Hashem. Very few people merited the classification of Eved Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu was Eved Hashem. Avraham Avinu was Eved Hashem. David is Eved Hashem. Eved, what is an Eved? Eved is the chattel of the master. That means every aspect of that person's being is what is totally subjugated, subordinated to God, to the will of Hashem. The Eved. Avraham, when we speak about the three most humble people who ever lived, who are they? Moshe Rabbeinu was Eved Hashem. Mem b'chol beisi. Avraham was Eved Hashem, and he was Anochi Ofav Efer. And David HaMelech was Eved Hashem, Anochi Tolei Eloish. I'm a worm, and not a person. So this is how it was expressed, how each one is classified. These are the most humble people who ever lived, the three levels. And each one is Eved. And when he was 30, he became king, he wrote the Perek in Tehillim, Lamtzeach le'Eved Hashem. That was the shir he said. So everything is 30. Man yarech yomim, melech shemolech kach, lamid yarech yomim, v'lo shol. So that means David, he reigned, how many years was he king? If he became king, David, we know, lived exactly 70 years. He passed away on the day that he was born, David HaMelech. 40 years. He became king at 30, and he passed away at 70, so he was king 40 years, David HaMelech.